Initial impressions are important. It's Rell, and let's dive into Lost Ark, Smilegate RPG's free isometric action MMO RPG. If you follow MMO news, you will likely have heard about the game's pay-to-win nature. And believe me, we will get there. But does the game have good points? Can it leave a positive initial impression? It starts out with a code of conduct. It's readable and has positive expectations of the player base. Good start. Next, we get to pick a class. My main complaint here is the game fails to give some of the classes reasonable amounts of clothes. I'm going exploring and fighting. At least give me some leg coverage. Each class has a decently made cinematic. It also has a quick video of things you can expect from the class. In addition, you can watch the background cutscenes for each character before deciding. Each of these scenes combines some pretty good voice acting with gorgeous still images for a wonderful experience. It does use the default character, so it feels a little disconnected from the one that you customize later. I picked the mage because I love grouping up enemies and doing massive AoE damage. Next up is the character customizer. It's really detailed. Honestly, to the point where the changes won't even matter. I spam the random face button and get tiny changes that are barely noticeable. Aside from a bit of clipping, the editor overall is pretty good. A quick option to turn on the photosensitive mode is a nice touch to help keep players safe. Next up, we pick an expert class, focusing our combat moves even more. Normally, having to lock in my playstyle this early would frustrate me. However, the game has a great test mode. It allows you to experience what each specialization will feel like and get used to the controls while fighting. The game's opening cutscene does a great job of setting the mood for an amazing adventure. The first thing I notice is that the NPCs have voice-acted overworld lines. While far from perfect, it does a great deal in getting me to feel like this world is alive. The game uses the mouse for movement. I'm not used to it yet, but I can really appreciate separating the movement and attack to two separate clicks, preventing the old issue of misclicking and running into the enemy instead of attacking. After a bit of passable tutorials, the game throws you into your first real fight. The abilities have a great feeling impact. The early enemies feel incredibly weak. When I'm messed up, I get hit and I take 5 or 6 damage to my 830 some odd health pool. This only gets a little better in my entire time playing. I never had to go near a potion despite being given piles of them, and ended most areas with basically full HP. The interactable set pieces in the world don't offer much from a mechanical perspective, but they have pretty decent animations, giving a bit of extra exploration feel. The cutscenes are great, but when they zoom in on someone talking, it shows how poor the mouth movements are. All the game had to do was not zoom in on the faces while people were talking, and it wouldn't have bothered me at all. My expedition party is attacked by trolls, and they decide to blow up the bridge, leaving me behind to deal with the trolls. I suppose there are trolls on both sides of the bridge. With me not being ready and still learning my abilities, I get hit quite a lot. But my HP pool is so massive, it really doesn't matter. I get my first item drop, and it's the same item with slightly improved stats. I much prefer games that limit the number of upgrades so they can have cool, unique, and impactful gear pieces. We have an in-game cutscene showing us how pretty the skyboxes are. The first boss fight shows some potential, but it's pretty easy and still feels like a no player left behind moment. I just had to show how ridiculous the cart chase scene was. We are running from a bunch of thugs that we could have easily taken in a horse-drawn cart, making deadly leaps, all while our character cart surfs. And then at the end, we end up fighting the thugs anyway and crushing them. After a bit of exposition, we are dropped into the first town. We have a bunch of pop-ups thrown in our face. Luckily, I have just the skill for this. Spam close them. Pretend they don't exist. I've played a lot of less than good MMOs, and honestly, I find ignoring this kind of pop-up provides the best experience. We get an actually free mount, and a decent tutorial on how to use it. Some town exploring, and well-made tutorials. And wait, why is this guy on a motorcycle? Does not fit this aesthetic at all. Okay, moving on. We get a small pop-up in the corner of the screen talking about training rooms. I actually learned a lot from these, making me demonstrate each mechanic before moving on. It really should have been done earlier, and in a less easy to miss manner. The first fields area has a decent number of enemies. My 3 main complaints are that the enemies give very little XP, just respawn really quickly, and don't pose any threat. So why not just run past them? Why have the enemies there if they don't serve a purpose? This is when I decide to do a bunch of rebinding of keys. The interface is easy to use, but for some reason they don't let you rebind the interact key. Why on earth can't I change this key? It isn't required for the menuing, the primary reason to not let players rebind a key. I literally had to go in and reprogram my mouse to have the key where I wanted it. Okay, for most of this area, I find myself kinda zoning out. The quests are alright, but nothing really engaged me. The abilities were fun to use, but there was nothing worthwhile to use them on. Even the bosses went down in just a couple hits. Finally, I get to the first dungeon. It's actually above ground. While slightly better than the fields, the difficulty was still too low. My net HP loss in the boss fight was 19, and it was only because I pushed some abilities for damage. The combat abilities do have some interesting customization options, giving you a few ways to augment the abilities you're already familiar with. I play through more fields and another dungeon. While it deals more damage than the last, even on hard mode, it's still trivial for me to clear solo. Now for the next good point. The town gets attacked. Okay, that sounds a bit bad, but it's actually a pretty tense scene with some good music. You charge in and start killing demons and freeing villagers. And unless you dash right into a horde of demons by accident, definitely not me, the combat is still pretty easy, but it is ramping up a little bit. My real issue with this one is the cutscene at the end. While your friend is fighting the demon, your character just stands doing nothing at the door. Why am I not helping him? As I continue playing, the missions really started to blur together. The abilities are still fun to use, and grouping up hordes of enemies and AoEing them down is satisfying, but nothing else is really rewarding. Every piece of loot I get is just the same item with slightly better stats. It's just not exciting. Now let's talk about the pet quest. It's literally just me opening a jar and collecting grain and rice, then talking with a few people who gush about pets, getting one for free, and more gushing about pets. If I had to take a guess, there's a way to purchase pets for out-of-game currency in the shop. I move on to the next area, and there's more of the same. The new art is great, but the gameplay and the quests aren't exciting me. I think my biggest issue with the quests is that most of them are kill 8 of these enemies to quell their numbers, or something like that. But since they respawn infinitely, my actions don't seem to have any real effect on the game. It is a common issue with MMOs, but it doesn't change the fact that I don't feel like I'm making a difference. I find another dungeon and set it to hard mode. I had thought I took a very small amount of damage during the dungeon, but I went over my footage, and it turns out the only reason my HP was not full was because I put on a slightly better piece of gear. My max HP increased, but not my current, so I didn't have full HP. No actual damage. This was the point that I decided to stop. The next dungeon I found, on solo hard mode, dealing me literally 0 damage, just bored me. But we still have some cleanup to do. I went back and tried out the other classes. They each had a great little backstory, even if the character in the cutscene doesn't match your customized character. I had a great time in the testing arena trying out each of the expert classes. Next, we go through the menus. To the game's credit, it does block you out of plenty of the systems because we haven't gone into them yet. It's pacing them pretty decently. Most of the ones I have access to, I've had at least some tutorial. Well, it does feel like there are too many systems. There is a passable effort to explain each one to the player and give them time to explore it. And finally, the infamous shop. I certainly didn't play to max level and won't claim I know how important each item is, but I am familiar with how predatory shop design works. The first thing that catches my eye is a timer counting down, trying to elicit your fear of missing out response. While the discounts are not as flashy as many other games, it is still trying to make you make that first purchase because it's good value. As I guessed earlier, all the gushing about pets is trying to push us to purchase them from the shop. While the shop has plenty of other issues, a giant tell of the design intentions is how you purchase stuff in the shop. The packs you purchase currency in are designed to always make you spend more than the thing you want, leaving you with a little extra currency. You spend more and feel like you're losing out if you don't buy another pack to make use of your change. The shop is bad, but I will say it's not as bad as I've seen elsewhere. Still clearly built to exploit players, though. Does Lost Ark have a good player onboarding experience? Well, my initial thought was yes. The art is great, the combat feels really well designed. However, the more I played, the less interested I was. The enemies didn't feel difficult, and I can only enjoy crushing things weaker than me for so much time. The quests just didn't engage me. Go fight some weak enemies, and maybe press G a couple times. Even the cutscenes stopped interesting me when my character was not included in them. The tutorials were fairly well done, and the system's introductions were at least decently spaced out. The cash shop looked concerning, but it wasn't forced on me. So, would I recommend Lost Ark? Yeah, but with two primary caveats. First and foremost, you need to be someone who can control their spending. Second, you also need to be someone who enjoys using some awesome abilities to grind through weak enemies and average at best quests to achieve your goals. I certainly had enough fun to feel like my time wasn't wasted, but not enough that I'm dying to go back. Now I'm curious, what do you all think of Lost Ark? Have you played it? If so, how much fun did you have with it? If not, would you consider playing it, or is it just not your thing? Either way, thanks for making it all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next.